Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February 7th edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting with MakerDAO. We have an interesting call today. We are going to do some show and tell. So this is part of the evolution of these meetings. I discussed in our last call about how we've been on a track, a very long track. We've had a lot of these meetings because there's been a lot to go over, but we're sort of past the education and onboarding phase, and we transitioned into the general discussion phase, and then we talked a bit about more interaction. And then quite recently, we've talked about moving more into actionable intel, sort of a theme for these meetings. And as part of that, today we have two special guests. One is Joe Quintilian. Joe, I mentioned that you're going to be on a call in Reddit and Twitter, and in both of those messages, I promised to ask you what your title means, because I don't know what it means. What is head of PTD? What does that mean?
Head of proprietary trading, and I provide liquidity within DAI.
There you go. Mystery solved. All right, and Madison will be joining us as well.
She is unfortunately sick, so I'm taking
Oh, okay. All right, so we'll look forward to a visit from her in our next call. I think that, oh yeah, sorry, I always forget. I'm not going to forget anymore. So we're very, very interested in getting feedback from the community. We want to have these calls be a discussion and not priests from the temple coming out and having a big speech and going back inside. So if anybody has a question, please feel free just to jump right in and start asking. If you don't have access to a mic, please type your questions in the chat at the side, and we'll wait for a quiet moment and ask those for you. And make sure that we have a lot of back and forth, because we have some very talented visitors. There's some people with a lot of deep insight in this call, and we want to hear from more than just MakerDAO in these. So having said that, Steven, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Okay, so today what we're going to do is try something that's a bit of a first of its kind. What we're going to do is replicate verbally how our sort of pseudo-libel process is going to work. We're going to replicate how we will effectively put forward an argument in terms of a stability fee change, and then at the same time give an indication of what kind of evidence to back that argument. Now, keep in mind that, generally speaking, one would do this within a report and then come up with a conclusion like, therefore, I believe the stability fee should be X, Y, or Z. So what I'm going to do is be extremely sort of high level, so that we don't get too much into the detail, in order to have enough time to discuss the sort of salient features around this, and at the same time get a sense of what is it that we're actually trying to achieve at the end of the day. So to that point, and as Rich has already mentioned, I asked Joe to come and join us. And as Joe has mentioned, he looks after the proprietary trading desk for the foundation, and within that trading desk performs, amongst other things, the market making function. Now, what we need to do is we are going to act as the first sort of risk team that proposes a liable submission. We're basically going to give you a breakdown of why we think the stability fee should change and in what direction, and give a sense of what information we have that supports that. Once we've done that, we can open up to the rest of the folks on this call and get a sense of what they would think as well. And then ultimately we can go into the weeds a little bit and have a look at a bit of the details and the analytics. So to that end, I'm going to hand over to Joe. You mute, Joe.
Yep, sorry. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your time. I have 3 points for why the stability fee should be higher here. I'm just going to share my screen for 2 seconds and show you some of the stuff here. So right now you see this is the first one is the inventory levels. This screen you can see the stability fee when it decreased from 2.5% to 0.5%, and our inventory levels went up from 10% being DAI to over 10% of the whole entire system to being almost 20% of the system being us holding DAI. I think that's not the target we want to have. I think we want to be down at like 15%. We don't want to be that much of the system. And I also noticed, leads my next point, that most of the offers, if you look at like where Coinbase is trading and where ETH to DAI is trading, it's trading at like almost 99.5, 99.3. It's offered below $1. And I'd like to maintain it around $1. I think if we keep things around $1, it also bring back our inventory levels. One other point I just want to point out is that if you guys have CoinMarketCap, it's totally incorrect on FatBTC. The FatBTC is being calculated incorrectly, not by FatBTC, by CoinMarketCap, because the transaction amount right down here on the amount is going in as 18.6 ETH instead of 0.186 ETH into the volume bars, and that way it's generating a lot more volume, and then multiplying it by ETH, and that's why they're getting millions of dollars in trading. I've been watching it over the past week, and that's why it's incorrect on CoinMarketCap. But if you look at the rest of the CoinMarketCap, all trading below $1. So that's those are my 3 points, and I have a lot more data, what we'll go over later on.
Well, okay, I'm going to jump in with a few questions in advance of anybody else. That first graph that you showed us, was that just our internal data, or is this aggregated across a couple of desks?
This is our internal data, and our internal inventory levels that we have.
Yeah, so just to break it down, the blue line effectively is on the primary axis, which is on the left-hand side, that is the inventory percentage of supply. The gray one is the price of ETH at the same time. And then obviously the orange one is the stability fee. So it gives you a sense of what the percentages were in terms of inventory, how it dropped off, how we did a correction in the stability fee, and how it increased back up. Now, the one thing that's obviously interesting and why, we've all decided to include the ETH price is because, you got to be open-minded and say to yourself, well, what's driving this process? Is it the ETH process? Is it the ETH price? Is it the stability fee? Now, to that end, we try and figure out that it is the stability fee, but, the question is open. And the question is something that I hope to get folks from this call interested in trying to answer as well.
Okay, so I guess that this is a really great graph because, as you pointed out, we have 2 data points here, and we don't know which one actually moves the needle. So does that mean that this is what fed into the decision that a stepping rate over time would be the way to go? So if we did 50 basis points every 2 or 3 weeks, we would have enough. We'd have enough plots in order to figure out whether, or to disregard shifts in ETH price and have confidence that it was actually a stability fee change that moved things the way we wanted to.
That is effectively the idea going forward. Get that robustness in place so that we can actually get a sense of what the sensitivity around the parameter can actually be.
And
this
also,
is a really interesting graph. Sorry, go ahead.
Also making sure that DAI remains around $1. It's been sustained below $1 for the past, I would say, 2.5 weeks. So that's.
So I'm going to throw another random question at you. How much off of the peg, what percentage or how many cents off the peg do we need to drift before you begin to get concerned? Or does it not matter? It's just the fact that it's on one side of the peg for too long. Is that?
No, it's been there. I feel like that's a sustained period of time, not like a day or two, like 2.5 weeks, 3.5 weeks, sustained selling. That I thought that would be a good time to raise the rate on that.
Okay. There's some other. It seems like I'm trying to figure out this blue line here because it's very dramatic.
That's our inventory. That was our inventory levels.
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to figure out what would have moved that. And am I seeing large CDP action as opposed to potentially numerous CDPs? Like, does this correlate with?
No, this correlates to our inventory levels, where we try to help maintain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the interesting question here is, did the rapid decline in ETH, make folks close their CDPs rapidly? In other words, did it increase the demand for DAI to do so?
Well, I'm wondering if the decreasing price liquidated a bunch of CDPs, and potentially that's what
it could have. But also the thing is as well is that whether it is CDPs liquidated, which most probably would have been an increase over that time period and a data point to include, but at the same time, just the natural demand for DAI to maybe close out CDP positions to release collateral as well. So there's two aspects here. And the one thing that's also very interesting is that there's a dramatic drop, or rather dramatic spikes down. And once you get to that sort of weirdly natural level around about 16, 17%, it seems to turn off a little bit. So it's, these are the sort of features that you can extract from this and try and come up to conclusions for yourself as to what this means. And then, from there, we can try and figure out a model to move forward. But expressly, the inventory level and the protracted level of inventory and the protracted level of the DAI exchange rate below the $1 mark, those are the things that, from our point of view, drives our notion of what to do with stability fee. Now, remember, we are one contributing team towards this. So that's the example I'm trying to put forward today.
Sure. I'm trying to figure out whether we need to gauge the response to a change in the stability fee. So whether we see people adding more to their positions, or whether we see people closing out their positions, that understanding the cause and effect of a stability fee change on the actual users of the system would be an interesting data point to collect as well, right?
I would also make sure to just reference, let's not confuse causality and correlation, right? I mean, from what that graph, sorry, Joe, you just had it up, but the graph you just had up, one can make an argument that as the ETH price went down, Maker basically helped construct a soft landing. It's very difficult to see the data without other metrics in there to be able to come up with a solid thesis as to what caused those graphs.
Mm-hmm. And that is it. That's the foundation that we're looking for. That's the foundation from which we are asking folks now, if you want to create the risk team for yourself, start thinking about what the model should look like and then contribute appropriately. You must remember, this is just merely an exercise from our front to show you and to talk through a process that ultimately will become a lot more rigorous and a lot more well-defined. But in doing so, we're going to talk about everything from what metrics to include, what models to think about, where's this information coming from, what's the integrity of that information, so of that data, and so on and so forth. But these are exactly the sort of questions we're looking for right now.
So as someone who I used to analyze, split testing statistics a lot, which is much easier than what we're trying to do here. But one thing I would always look at is where, because there's always so much noise, when do you actually see that something you did actually made a difference? And usually it doesn't. But in this case, and I'm not even sure the exact why, the inventory fell low, like dramatically. Then you lowered the stability fee and it immediately shot up dramatically. So clearly, I would guess that what we did there made a difference. And it seems like it overshot, went from 0.5% to 2.5%. So my guess is, well, maybe it would have been better if instead of 2.5, it was, 1.75. Maybe that would have been right. But keeping in mind, there's all these other variables. And I'm also wondering, why did the inventory drop precipitously beforehand? I think that was when the market was sort of crashing and there was some CDP trying to cover himself. And that was a whole crazy thing,
Yeah, that's kind of what we attribute the same behind the big drop coming from the big demand in DAI, which means obviously the inventory levels have to drop to support that demand in DAI to help close the CDP. So that's one thesis. It's not necessarily correct, but that's one idea.
It could also just be you know, Joe being a smart trader in the sense of, you know, the stability fee is going to, I forget what the timeline is, but you know the stability fee is going to decline pretty soon here. You're above $1, you know, you might as well sell here, and then you're reaccumulating inventories again, right?
Mm-hmm. There's one very interesting thing. If Joe, if you can bring up that graph again for a second, if you don't mind. Actually, I think I may have the same graph somewhere now.
Yeah, right now.
If everybody has a look at this graph, what's interesting about it is that have a look at the date that the stability fee dropped. You'll see it notes as the 14th of December, where in fact we actually, if I recall, executed it on the 21st. But the reason it was included as the 14th is that's because that was the date the article got published, that was the intention. So strictly speaking, the effect is almost measured at the inflection point of that inventory blue line. But the sort of lead lag effect you can almost talk to from the point that the article was published and informed everybody that the stability fee was to be changed.
That's a great point. So on these graphs, we should probably be delineating between announcement and implementation to see how powerful this signal is.
Exactly. So that's kind of why the change was made on the 14th and not actually on the 21st when the vote was passed. Because there's a lot of anticipation in there. There might have been a lot of movement. There might have been a lot of folks who really lined themselves up. And that may be also the reason why you have that big move back up in inventory again. But again, this is just a thesis, something that we're going to be working off of and eventually, you know, develop into a framework that allows us to give information at the same time, put forward a suggestion for a change in the stability fee. And this is what we think the liquidity provision environment should actually do as well, is get into a position where they can talk their book about what they want to see the stability fee doing. And you know that the incentive is aligned with respect to what they have on their book. But in order to have that privilege of submitting a suggestion, you need to put forward a bit of reasoning in terms of what your inventory levels may be, in terms of some process or some metric that you can share. And in that ability, you've got the aggregation of all this information, and this aggregation of all these submissions should net out to a very sort of robust net submission on stability fee. That's kind of like what LIBOR was trying to do before 2014, when everyone discovered it was being manipulated a little bit. Post 2014, they have a lot more processes in place that actually attributes directly to the bank's balance sheet, and in this case, it'll attribute back to the submitters' inventory levels as well. So there is going to be a need for a certain amount of transparency to get the privilege to submit a stability fee. So that's where we are at the moment. And based on the data that we're seeing, we are going to put forward if we can get some sort of consensus over here as a point of example, so sort of rough consensus over here, we can move forward to put a proposal forward to increase the stability fee by 50 basis points. So that's kind of what the outline of this sort of process looks like.
I have a question regarding the stability thing. One thing I've thought about, and just to make sure I have this correct, which is if there was a global, whatever you call it, global disaster, settlement process. So one thing I'm not sure is, well, would all the collateral be enough to pay everybody off? And my understanding is if it's not, and I don't know what the odds are of that, Maker token is supposed to be there to bail people out. My concern, at least at today, is if it ever got to that point, this Maker is not the most liquid thing. And that would go to zero in a hurry. I'm wondering, should Maker be sort of building up reserves regarding a global settlement disaster.
So your is incorrect, unfortunately. It's not with emergency shutdown, previously
There's a
called
lot of
global.
echo. I'm having trouble hearing. There's a lot of echo going on.
Yeah, Dave, can you, thank you. So with respect to emergency shutdown, what happens is, and this is just to put into a nutshell, you're left with dying collateral and that gets netted off. With respect to CDPs that get liquidated and fall short, that's when MKR steps in as a kind of insurance. So to your point about emergency shutdown, MKR is not a part of that process. Only with respect to CDPs being liquidated and not being fully satisfied. So it's not the grand context. It's the very specific collateral-based context.
I guess my thinking is, if there was a settlement, there would be so much liquidation that might cause the CDBs to not be enough, and therefore you would need the maker, or you don't assume that happening. It seems like there would be a lot of liquidations at once, which would sort of cause a problem on it as well.
So essentially, maker doesn't feature in emergency shutdown. That's the point. So you basically just left with DAI and collateral, and you net out to find out how much of that net loan position, how much of that a gross loan position you can cover. And you hope that in a shutdown, you'll have enough collateral to satisfy everything, such that you just return a portion of collateral back to the original CDP holders. That's the context, and that's the purpose of emergency shutdown. And MKR is not, it's basically not a part of that, because you've shut down the whole system, and that means MKR has been shut down as well. So that's the reason why you want to do that out. But MKR comes in, and to your point, and it's still something that is particularly important, and it goes to something called economic capital. And economic capital says, well, how much of your balance sheet do you want to risk on this particular function? And what we are, by extension, asking is, how much of MKR do we wish to risk for the collateral portfolio that we have? So you may find that at any one time, you're risking around about $10 million worth of economic capital for a $400 million collateral portfolio. And then you might find it becomes a little bit more exponential as the collateral portfolio increases. But to that end, what that 10 million economic capital is talking about is, in the worst possible scenario, you need to get 10 million quickly. Can you do it? And that comes still back to the question of, is the token liquid enough at that point in the time in order to be able to cover that? Right now, that question is definitely open and can be discussed. The reason that you can do it is because liquidity is really in the eye of the beholder in terms of what they see and what you can get on respective exchanges. But why I said eye of the beholder is because the exchanges themselves have a point of question in the integrity of their data. So liquidity itself as a broad concept in the crypto space is still very much open to inquiry. And we got to broaden that question until we finally get some sort of resolution on what liquidity is and what we can actually use it for, especially when it comes to price discovery, and especially when it comes to MKR liquidity. I know there was a bit of a data dump, but I hope it helped.
Yeah, that helped. I had a little misunderstanding, but I guess my other point then is just regarding what the stability fee should be. I saw a lot of discussions on Twitter about, well, what is Maker? What's the value of it? And, that's obviously not an easy question, but the idea is, well, you're only getting 0.5%, and if collateral was this, you only have 0.5%. So how is Maker worth much? And so I wonder, so in other words, obviously the concern is to keep DAI stable, but there might be some other concern of how much extra do you want to bring in to create capital in Maker? And I don't have the answers. Just something I've been thinking about. So, and I don't know.
I think that there are a lot of folks who've had the same question. So I think in a subsequent call, we can maybe go over the idea of how to go and use some traditional tools like DCF, Gordon Growth Model, with a little bit of adjustment to find out how to value Maker, understand what sort of permutations and sort of stochastic processes we need to think about in terms of stability fee and CDP liquidations. There's quite a few angles that you can attack this problem from. But that being said, the sense of value you can almost attribute solely to the governance utility, and at the same time the release of value from proposals. And what I mean by that is, if you bring in a specific collateral type and it gives you a potential debt ceiling, how much value are you bringing to the system? How much value are you basically putting into the utility of governing? And that is essentially also a question we really need to tackle.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Excuse me.
On the data that was shown, do we have any of the historical pieces prior to the dates that were shown? Like since DAI started floating?
Prior November, no, we don't really have sort of sufficient data. No. This was basically, we can probably scrimp it together, but in terms of this particular governance call, this is pretty much what we have, but I know that Joe has a little bit more deep access. So Joe, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I have a whole entire, once we get past later on the call, I'll show you a whole, we put together a whole entire website for the governance meeting, and more data will be coming for everybody. So does anybody have any questions about the stability fee?
Cassidy just asked a question in the chat I can read out. He says, or she says potentially, I think it would be really interesting to see the effect of the announcement of a change in the stability fee as compared to its actual change. So this ties back to what we were discussing earlier. Forward guidance is such a powerful tool for the Fed. Would be curious to see how much that concept carries over to Maker. So this is interesting. Is this something that we've considered, just saying to the community, hey, we're going to change if you guys don't clean up your act?
Yeah, that was somewhat implied in that first graph where the change was shown on the 14th as opposed to when it actually was in effect on the 21st, just to see if there was a semblance of impact. I mean, if you have a look at that point and you go up to the blue line, it doesn't look like there was a tremendous effect. But if you actually go to the inflection point on the 21st, you're already in that sort of upward scale. So to that end, it looked like our announcement didn't really have that much of effect at first. So the ability to do that we'll obviously keep assessing, because the ability just to say, listen, things are going a little bit too hot and heavy, we need to cool it down a bit, somewhere in the future that may be sufficient to sort of incentivize people to take their foot off the pedal a bit.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's sort of the same tool we have with the the emergency shutdown system in general. We have these mechanisms in place. We don't necessarily need to hit that big red button. We can just tell people that if trends continue the way they have been, we're going to alter the system. That might be enough. It's a fascinating concept.
I mean, there's quite a few folks on this call that could probably talk to this for a long time, but all the incentives are in play that, yes, you do have the big red button, but if you press it, here are your consequences. Mm-hmm. And that ties back into keeping the incentive structure of the whole system intact and robust and aiming in one direction. Well, to that end, if there are no further questions about this little process that we have informally presented, I would like to say and just reiterate that what we've done here and now is just a very simple demonstration of the kind of submission and the kind of evidence that you want to give. Clearly, we can go into much more detail, and as soon as we get more robust data, we can get much better models. There are tons of folks out there who could quite easily take something from the traditional world and stick it in here, given that the data was robust, given that it was a little bit more clear. But the end-to-end is to start with the notion of what we want to do as a submitting risk team. And what we want to do is increase the stability fee by 0.5%. We then present to you the folks that look after this particular function, and that was Joe, to present the further arguments and the evidence behind it. And then at the end, again, say, well, the proposal we'd like to put forward is to increase by 50 basis points. That's the end-to-end. And obviously that's going to be a lot more rigorous and a lot more well defined going forward. But if there aren't any other questions on that point, and if
Did we lose Steven?
then we can move over to the further analytics that Joe has in store for us.
All right, Joe, do you want to take it away for us?
Sure. So I'm going to put I'll put this link in the chat here for everybody here. So what Madison, who's unfortunately not here, was able to go through some of the data that which is a very smart girl who Steven hired and Sean hired, credit to them for Maker. And we're able to go back through a lot of data that I thought would be pertinent to DAI governance. And the first graph, which is it's an interactive chart, so go ahead and you can click it and everything. You can see the active addresses for DAI and the spikes up we've had. Obviously, you saw dramatic spikes in DAI addresses when ETH was getting smoked, getting killed, and it's still on an upward trend. And I thought that was an interesting graph for everybody to see. These are like percentage of DAI on exchanges that we get listed on. So we're still around 2%, even though we get listed on some of the some new exchanges. But like as we there are major exchanges that we've listed on, but like Coinbase Pro. But like we think that this percentage will eventually grow with this growing DAI active addresses.
Should we ask questions as you go along, or do you want to save those till the end?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it looks. Sorry, can you pull that graph back for me?
Sure. And also the link is you guys can follow it too. So
the percentage of DAI on exchanges, it looks like it's going down. Was there some outliers at the beginning there, or
what has to be included in this thing is like we're being added onto other exchanges, major exchanges. That's why it looks like it's going down. But like the percentage, because we're added. I have this graph will be a little better next time. Like this will be on the major exchanges as we go along.
Okay. So percentage of DAI. So this is the amount of DAI that's being held on those exchanges. It's not the velocity here.
Yeah.
It's just what's actually sitting there. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And this is like Oasis. This is Oasis volume. You can click on these graphs. You can click to not have that and just see like total DAI volume. This is like the major pair that everybody trades is ETH DAI that I've noticed. I mean, I don't think anybody else really trades. I mean, once in a while you see US Tether DAI if something happens to Tether, but like you can see the overall overall Twitter users have been going up. And overall ETH DAI volume has been on the upswing since September. This shows you the DAI exchange volume and the transaction volume that goes on. One thing that'll be interesting going forward as DAI gets bigger is the medium transaction value. I suspect it'll probably go lower because it'll have be more high frequency traders come in and trade a lot more in smaller increments.
I guess when I look at graphs like this, I think that that's encouraging, but then I always have this nagging suspicion that have we filtered for wash trading? And so has this data been sanitized yet, or is this sort of like the raw dump from CMC?
Right now, this is most of this is raw dump from CMC, but like the exchanges that have known to be wash trading, I will eventually weed them out, but I'm not going to do that now. But we will get that in the future. This DAI token movement between addresses. I thought that was interesting because this is like when we were having the big movement. This is when we adjusted everything from 2.5% down to 0.5%.
That's one of the most interesting or compelling graphs for me, at least, I think, is when people talk about the liquidity of stable coins. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'm obviously biased, but it's on-chain transactions that carry the most weight with me. Seeing an uptick of people actually moving DAI between one wallet and another is really encouraging. So it looks like we're seeing adoption here then.
Yeah, it's just slowly, there's spikes, but like eventually with the movement in token price. But the fact that we're getting bigger DAI volume transactions movement, even with ETH declining as much as it has, is pretty good. This is DAI transaction volume over DAI in circulation. I think I like this graph because it's like more of it it's encouraging. I'd rather see DAI transaction volume that this keeps on getting smaller and smaller and smaller. That way you know that there's more, the overall transaction. There's not many people. One person controls everything, and there's more people using the system. You don't want big time whales. This is pretty good. This is a DAI wallet exchange inflow and outflow. Kind of like a little bit from the one before, and then the one below is the token transfers by month.
Sorry, I'm missing something. What's the difference between token transfers per month and just the?
That one I'll have to ask Madison on. I will not know. I do not know that one, but she's not. Unfortunately, she's not here. But what will happen going forward to everybody in the governance call? We will eventually have this like a little bit better website for governance, or we're going to figure out how we're going to post this up before the meetings and allow everybody to get along with the graphs. This whole thing was inspired by our friends at Placeholder because they did some unbelievable graphs for a presentation about like 3 weeks ago. I thought it'd be important for everybody to see everything. And as we go along, there'll be more and more info that we'll be submitting to it each week.
All right, that's cool. So are we talking about sort of exposing a tool set or a dashboard for risk teams, external and internal to use, or is it?
Slowly we'll be presenting. Slowly we'll be allowing everybody to see all the data. Yep.
Okay. And so I'm envisioning we'll allow people to download data sets that we're using to generate these graphs as well. So
yes.
Will we be providing clean data? Okay, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we got the first part of this meeting was simplistic in the idea that we wanted to do we do want to do a stability fee change. We give you an abstract of why we want to do it, and then obviously at the tail end we presented you with quite a few metrics that can be used or consolidated into the decision-making process as well. So to that end, what we need to do is sort of finalize this with saying that given this position, given this data, and given the reasoning that we put forward, we are going to put forward a proposal that is going to request a 0.5% increase in the stability fee. I'm hoping to have that proposal out before Tuesday next week, which is I think the 14th. What is it? 12th, sorry. Before the 12th, Tuesday the 12th. So please look out for that, and obviously go ahead and vote on it.
Well, one question for you. I mean, I think it's an important component to add to any discussion related to, let's make the assumption right now it's 0.5 percentage point, whatever the number is. What is the objective in raising it? If you mentioned it was liquidity, that's fine. Then how will we know if, it's like, how do we define winning? Like, how do you know if we raised it 0.5 point, what are we realistically expecting it to go down to? What is our expectation so that we can come back in whatever the time frame is, 6 months, and reevaluate it and say, listen, we raised it by 50 basis or whatever, 0.5 point, and it did X, we were expecting Y. So let's learn from this iterative process and how we look at it in 6 or 7 months.
I'll answer that right now. I really would like a sustained period of DAI trading not below 1 and right around 1, back and forth. That's where our goal is. So it's not completely on the offer on the order books. That's our goal.
So Matt, are you saying that you want some kind of this is the amount we're pulling the lever, and this is our expected results, and sort of to kind of gauge some confidence in decision-making process? Is that what you're thinking? So we change it by 0.5 point. We expect that within 3 to 4 weeks, we'll begin to close the gap on $1 or something.
I mean, this is a new project. None of us is experts. I'd love to think we all are. It's an iterative process. It's a learning process for all of us. It will be for as long as we stay with the project. So if we just say we change the numbers without really having an underlying target, now Joe, what you said, I 100% agree with. Like, if the fundamental objective is to get the price to go back and stick at 1, I agree with it. You know, if our objective is to ensure that the underlying risk collateral basket doesn't expose us to too much risk, I agree. If it's because we need to get liquidity down or whatnot, it's just important to just tie it to something so we can look back and learn.
I think we also have to remember that although this is our lever that we pull, that we want to see a certain result, there's a lot of other levers out there that we don't control, such as the price of Ethereum or someone with a CDP doing whatever, or there's all these other things that can have an effect that sort of muddies the effect of our lever. So we sort of, it's almost like I guess that's like some of the graphs we were looking at. Just in other words, if we increase the rate and, you know, the inventory changes, it might not only because we changed the rate, maybe something else happened, and then in the future we change the rate and then something else doesn't happen. It doesn't work the same way. It's, you know, we got to remember this is a very complex system. I don't know how many levers Maker has, but there's a lot of levers out in the economy.
Yeah, the one aspect that's always important about any analysis that you do, and you hit the nail on the head, is, you know, what are your confounding variables? And to a certain extent you can identify them, and unfortunately there's an extent to which you cannot. So for what we have now, I'd say the best way to understand the 2 metrics that you want to aim for, one is inventory level, the other one is the DAI exchange rate. And we want to make sure that we can get a sense of that in terms of a threshold that the internal proprietary trading desk is happy with, but at the same time is also looking at trying to readjust the exchange rate back to around about the $1 mark. Now, once again, keep in mind that the point of this exercise here and now is to show how you can align the incentive with the book to actually achieve the robustness that you need in the system. Because you got to think about independent risk teams and independent liquidity providers out there doing the same thing. What is their incentive to submit? If their incentive is not to be profitable, if their incentive is not to benefit themselves, they will not be submitting. And that's the process that we need to emphasize here, is that there actually is this very clear dynamic that allows us to align everything appropriately and still get that robustness and still get the ability to rebalance the demand supply function that's within the system. What we're talking about now is obviously not the full solution, because that comes with a proper decentralized function. But what this does do, and I thank you for all the, thank you guys for contributing to today's call, is that we're looking for that open dialogue, saying, right, we know what you're doing. We need to consider, as you pointed out, confounding variables. We need to consider exactly what the targets are. We need to put a date to this. We need to figure out how this all comes together into a well-formed plan. And that's exactly what I hoped to get out of this, is that everyone start thinking about that, because we certainly are doing that. We certainly do have targets. We do have timeframes. We do have this, but we are just one member of the community, and we are contributing as a member of the community. We don't have any sort of special privileges, other than the fact that, you know, we do have insight into the data now. But soon, once we have enough contributors to the liquidity provision function, we're going to be one of many who are going to have that sort of insight. And then from there, we need to make sure that they are appropriately incentivized to share that information as a whole, to make sure that the system remains robust. I sound like a broken record here, but it's worth emphasizing.
Okay, I think that we have 10 minutes left. We had an interesting tour, and there's a lot to digest here, but we can also open up the floor a bit to just general questions as well, if anybody has anything.
Yeah, any questions in general? I mean, I think we achieved what we needed to achieve today.
Okay, so I've got one. So we were talking about the price and the objective, almost a twofold objective. One, to ensure the price goes as close to one as possible, with as many zeros to the right as possible. In parallel, almost equally weighted, to ensuring the underlying collateral, that, call it stability fee, you can call it an insurance premium, whatnot, that we're appropriately adjusting the premium for that risk.
Yeah.
Fine. The question I have is, so when we look at the price, you picked Coinbase Pro, which has very thin volume. And, you know, right now they charge 1/3% in commission to buy it, which is probably way too high. Fine, separate market question, but that's the point though, is how much of should we in the future, if we want to make it half a point today, fine, but how much in the future do we want to try and align market forces or replace market forces by using an interest rate? And to me, that whenever if I wanted to, you know, as an arbitrage opportunity, I could just put a limit order to buy DAI at 99 cents, knowing that it's worth $1. That's an arbitrage opportunity, a market opportunity, not necessarily a governance, a fundamental objective, unless there's a collateral risk misalignment.
If you look at Coinbase Pro, I was using an example of what the ETH volume is. I was looking for other examples where volume is for DAI. The DAI, I was doing the comparison of why there's a huge price difference between ETH USD and ETH DAI versus what's going on ETH to DAI, which I recommend everybody go to. That's the new Oasis. So that was the difference there. But we would like everybody to be. We would like it to be around with. Yeah, there you go, Thomas. We would like it to be around to get to $1. I don't think you want it to be on the offer there, Matt. Our job is to make sure that everything is around $1.
Yeah, so the one aspect that I want to just reemphasize again to that question is that you've got to pretend for a moment that we are not a part of the foundation. We're an independent operator. How are we incentivized to ensure that we achieve these objectives where, you know, the DAI is trading around $1? And that is to basically align incentives. So the arbitrage component is very important here. I mean, firstly, you have the natural arbitrage component that keeps a DAI pegged to $1. But when you have frictions and you don't have enough continuity and fluidity in the market, and you leave it to its own devices, you're going to find a massive spread, because the natural arbitrage component doesn't take over quickly enough. Therefore, you have particular players coming and focus on creating trading algorithms and market making functions around that to try and capture as much of that for themselves. In so doing, you would build an inventory that would be generally marked below $1, with the hope that if you could submit a stability fee, you would want to submit one that would induce the system to go to $1. Because once you're at $1, you can release your inventory at $1 and obviously be incentivized to make that profit. That's where the function comes in. That's where the alignment comes in. So there's quite a few. There's the natural arbitrage in the system. There's the natural sort of mean reverting aspects of a market making function within a proprietary desk that allows you to capture profits. But that's also very much driven by a next step item, and that is the ability to submit what you think the stability fee is. I mean, you are practically talking your own book. You're practically suggesting something that is going to, if it does work, make you money. It incentivizes you along with the system. Now that you've got to consider as an independent operator. If you take that point of view and then you expand it to many operators, and you expand it to what all those books would look like and how those folks would want to contribute a submission, they're going to be different. And the point being is the more diverse they are in their opinions, the more robust that net stability fee would be at the end of the day. And that's kind of what we're looking at. So the arbitrage components, the natural structural components, and the ability to influence, but with the quid pro quo of having transparency is especially important.
We're kind of dealing though with 3 variables and 2 equations, right? I mean, right now, the 150% collateralization, liquidation, call it floor, is a static. It's a known right now. So the stability fee is in effect an insurance component of what do we in single collateral DAI, what do we realistically think the probability will be that the system needs to stay stable by having a what percentage of a stability fee? What is just probability of it collapsing and causing defaults and bad stuff, right? If we have a scenario where we can, I'm just making numbers up, so let's just say it's 1% right now, which it's not, but assume it was, and the percentage over collateralization rate, instead of being 150%, was 200%, or make it 1,000%, is 1% too high? Okay, I don't know the answer, but my point is, do we change the percentage, the stability fee, based upon the market price of DAI? Or are we changing it as a component of what the risk to the collateral is?
So the one aspect you've got to keep in mind is that the stability fee has, for all intents and purposes, 2 components. The first component talks to the underlying risk that you take with respect to the collateral type, and that'll always be there. And then you cannot go below it. So if you have a look at the operational and credit risk premium that you have in a stability fee, it may end up being 0.75 basis points. So the 0.75 basis points may be the floor to your stability fee if that collateral type that you include there's only one of them, and that is the floor. So you'll have 0.75 as the lowest you can go. In other words, the policy part of it, which is the second component, would be 0. And that's kind of what I've been talking about previously, is that your stability fee has many facets to it, of which one is as a policy instrument. And even within that, and this depends on the sort of granularity of the levers we want to use. You can have a policy instrument specific to the collateral type, and you've got a policy instrument specific to the collateral the collateral portfolio as a whole. So that is something that is already taken into consideration. So you're spot on, 100% correct. I mean, you can't start changing the stability fee against the very risk nature of the collateral type that you included as well. There may be a time where you've created enough buffer where you can do that, but at the moment, the point of the matter is that we have to be cognizant of both parts. So you're absolutely right there.
Thank you.
All right, I think that might be a good point to end the meeting. One last question, possibly. All right, let's see if we can get through this one very quickly. Eric, I'm going to read out your question for you. Can you speak a bit more to the inventory level in the first graph that was presented today, i.e. the 20% of die supply? Whose inventory was that?
That's
Joe,
that's the foundations, yeah.
Okay. And so is Joe acting as a market maker on behalf of the foundation? Yes. And is, oh, sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, is Joe acting as a market maker on behalf of the foundation? He is providing, amongst other things, a market making function in his role as a proprietary trading desk, yes.
Yeah, I think that's the distinction that should be made. And I had to actually Google it. So can you tell us what the difference is between a proprietary trading desk and a market maker?
Well, a market maker, this is from the regulatory point of view, and this is very important. A market maker is by default a dealer. And dealer is a very clearly defined person that opens himself and puts himself out as someone who has inventory for the public to come in and purchase and sell. Think of a second-hand car salesman. They deal in cars. So they tell the public, come and buy cars from me. I have an inventory to sell to you. Because you're including the public, because you're putting yourself out to the public needs to be protected. That's why the regulation is in place. Now, if you are a market maker, you are saying to the public, I'm going to make two-way prices for everybody. Come and hit my two-way prices. I am literally making myself known out there as a market maker. And that means that you are first and foremost a dealer. So think about the car salesman again. If you're a proprietary trading desk, you're doing this for your own account. You are a trader first and foremost. You're not putting yourself out there saying that you are providing prices, you're not selling inventory, you are basically trading for the purpose of looking after your own book. So you do not have special privileges. And the one thing a market maker does with an exchange, and they actually negotiate contracts with an exchange, is to get a privileged position. Because in doing so, they will provide the exchange with the necessary bootstrapping functionality to get liquidity in. I'm going to talk about the traditional market now, the smaller cap stocks, but they can also act as sort of the momentum in the sort of medium cap, even to a certain extent, the large cap stocks. So that's the most important thing. If you have a privileged position, like a dealer or like a market maker, then you are de facto engaging with the public. You need regulation. You need the public to be looked after. If you're a proprietary trading desk, then you are basically trading for your own accord. And if it just so happens that you create a market making function, you can almost see it like the high frequency traders do. They're not, to a certain extent, they are market makers. They go to the exchange and they make a deal with the exchange, and they have to be licensed, which they are. There's some other high frequency traders that just literally sit there. They take the same costing as everyone else in the space, and it makes both sides of the market because they see an edge. And that's kind of what we're doing. But we're doing that with the idea of also bootstrapping the liquidity provision system. We're also doing that with the idea of saying, as a proprietary trading desk, we're not only putting this out there, but we're also creating a template to show everyone that, yes, you can do it as well. And at the same time, if you wish to submit to the stability fee, then it's inherently important for you to be very transparent as to why you're doing that. So we don't have the pre-2014 issue with LIBOR where everyone was submitting, but nobody knows why they were submitting.
Okay, that's great context. Thank you, Steven. People are starting to miss their next call, myself included. So let's wrap it up there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Joe, for those graphs. That was great. I'm looking forward to seeing some more in the future. Thank you, Steven, for your time. And we're looking forward to seeing the first draft of that proposal next Tuesday, I think you said. Is that true?
Yes, by next Tuesday, we should see the proposal sitting in the governance portal.
All right. Thank you to David Levine, for Matt, Cassidy, and Eric for your excellent questions. I hope you join us next time. And thanks, everybody else. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.